I don't think it would be unfair to say that Knights of the Fallen Empire and its sequel Knights of the Eternal Throne are the two most controversial DLCs in the Old Republic's history. There are some who really enjoy the content in it, and others who completely loathe it and think the game would have been better without it ever being added. Like I did with Shadow of Revan, I decided to ask Reddit what they thought of this expansion, and the results were wildly different. There were a few constant themes and thoughts, such as replayability issues, but a lot of the opinions over the expansion differ a lot. I will link the post in the description. But let's go back to the beginning. Knights of the Fallen Empire had been hinted at as far back as April 2015, when during the community Cantina tour, attendees were given wristbands with the hashtag Fallen Empire. However, it wouldn't be until June 2015, when during the Electronic Entertainment Expo, EA revealed the expansion with a new cinematic trailer, Sacrifice. This trailer was brilliant. It was done by Blur Studios, who had done some of the other cinematic trailers, but we hadn't gotten any sort of Old Republic cinematic trailer since before the release of the original game, so it was a really nice surprise. This trailer, while being well made, did bring in a number of questions. We were seeing a completely new faction that was not only fighting the Empire and the Republic, but seemingly beating them. This made it very clear we were going to be stepping away from the traditional Empire versus Republic dynamic, which had been, well, the main premise of the game. This had been changed in Shadow of Revan somewhat, but it was not like the two sides really liked each other. They were just getting along to defeat a bigger enemy, and there was clear tension, and it left room for faction v faction content in the future. Over the next few months, we got more reveals about the game, which began to show us the type of expansion we were getting, and how it would shape the game. One of the big reveals was that now players would be able to boost their characters up to level 60, so that they can take part in the Fallen Empire content from day one. This wasn't anything new for MMOs. After all, Guild Wars 2 and even World of Warcraft had added similar features before, which allowed players to boost their characters to a max level to skip a lot of the leveling content. These tend to be somewhat controversial for any MMO, with some players feeling that it goes against the very natures of MMOs, and other players not minding or even liking it. One of the things which was interesting about the boost was that you went straight into Fallen Empire with no option to do class stories or the other DLCs, which did annoy some people. Let's finally have a look at the story. I will cover some of the first few chapters individually, then talk about the entire story as a whole. So when I was planning this video, I was really struggling of what to do about spoilers. I eventually came to the decision that I'll include relatively heavy spoilers up to chapter 9, but I'll exclude a couple of things. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I feel it's necessary to talk about other parts of the expansion after chapter 9 to give context. And the reason I'm doing this is that I feel to talk about what happens after chapter 9, especially some of the other endgame stuff, it's necessary to talk about up to chapter 9, but I'll try to be as light on spoilers as possible. Now that we have that out the way, let's look at the story of this expansion. To be clear, this expansion is first and foremost a single player expansion, and that is really reflected in the story. It carries on from the events of Ziost when the Sith Emperor essentially ate a planet, with Darth Maul now heading up a combined Republic and Empire task force to hunt down the Sith Emperor and bring him to justice once and for all. One of the biggest changes to the game, which is highly noticeable within the very first seconds of this expansion, is the massive overhaul to cutscenes. Lighting is used much better, the camera moves more, characters move more dynamically, especially in combat. I really cannot stress enough how great this overhaul is. This expedition to find the Emperor goes about as well as you would expect, with us being ambushed by the new faction and getting our first combat against our new enemy, the Eternal Empire, and their hordes of totally not robot stormtroopers. We even get Darth Maul as our companion for a short while, although we do end up losing to our enemies and being captured. After getting captured, we get dragged in front of the Eternal Empire's Emperor, Valkorion, who we find out is in fact the Sith Emperor, who just apparently had a second empire and a different body this entire time, because why not? He wants us to kneel and serve him, but things go bad and poor Mar, probably the best leader the Sith ever had, it doesn't go well for him. One thing leads to another and we get put in Carbonite. I think the Carbonite sequence, which makes up chapter 2, is actually one of the strongest chapters in the entire game. We get to walk around a rather nice looking area, fighting new and old enemies with characters from our class stories appearing as bosses. Meanwhile the Emperor, who I will refer to from now on as Valkorion, taunts us. Valkyrian trying to convince you to use his power and taunting you is something that happens a lot throughout this DLC, and it does go to add a lot of character to him, even if he is still just a Saturday morning cartoon, mustache twirling villain. Quite unfortunately, Chapter 2 might just be the last time for a while that our class story is of any importance, as from here on out, every character storyline gets merged into a single one, with our character now being called the Outlander, without even references most of the time to our previous class stories. This was something which annoyed a lot of people, as some felt like it meant that our previous class stories, and even some of the previous DLC stuff, did not matter anymore, as no matter what class you are, or even if you are Empire or Republic, you still become the Outlander rather than your individual characters. After a time skip, we are woken by Lana Beniko with the aid of T7 from the Jedi story. During our escape from the planet, Zakul, we get a good glimpse at the architecture and design of this new faction. I actually quite like the look of the Eternal Empire in Zakul. It certainly does make them stand out from the Empire and the Republic. After a close escape, we meet some new companions and crash land in the wilderness outside the Zakul cities. The only really important things to mention in Chapter 4 is that we learn a bit more about what happened during the time skip and find the Deus Ex Machina, the Gravestone, which is used continually throughout Knights of the Fallen Empire and Eternal Throne to always find a way to stay alive. Although, hey, at least we get a montage of it being repaired, which is fun to watch. There's not really anything necessary to talk about in regards for the next few chapters, except to say that, to be honest, they are pretty good. But then we get to Chapter 9. At the end of Chapter 8, we take part in a battle and just barely escape from the Eternal Empire by the skin of our teeth, just to go to a new planet and form our own new faction, consisting of troops from across the galaxy who have all come together for the unified purpose of opposing the Eternal Throne. Ferren Shan arrives. We find out about how the Eternal Empire are now using star fortresses to control the galaxy. We get our ship back, and the DLC looks to be shaping into something incredible. Sure, some would say it had its faults by now, but things were really looking good. Next we get the objective to talk to Dr. Ogorob, and then it gets odd. Right, so we lost voice acting suddenly. This did confuse a number of players, me included. We had gone from a fully voiced player character to a voiceless one like most other MMOs, although the dialogue was presented in a more of a Knights of the Old Republic fashion. This led into the alliance system, where we were given the chance to strengthen our alliance. What this actually entailed was that we were supposed to go around the galaxy and find a mixture of old and new companions. Although instead of finding them, we did just click a button and get teleported straight to them. Where if they were from your class story, you could just talk to them and they'd come back to you, and if not, you just had to do a mission. To be fair, with the amount of dialogue options presented and the wide array of companions available, it is understandable but still slightly regrettable that these sections were not voice acted. These missions would often give you crates that you could trade in with one of your alliance specialists in that type of crate on Odessen to get armor and credits. This system was mainly used as a way to keep players occupied, as after Chapter 9 it wouldn't be until early 2016 that we actually got the next chapter, although from then on we did get our chapters released almost monthly. The rest of the chapters range from pretty good to just mediocre, although Profit and Plunder to me is certainly a standout chapter among them. But hey, at least all of these chapters were fully voice acted. Eventually though, we got the last chapter and had to wait until the next DLC to continue the story of the Outlander. So, while we are on the topic of the story, I want to bring up some things. One of the biggest criticisms of the expansion is that it is heavily focused towards a Force user experience, rather than a bounty hunter, agent, smuggler or trooper. Normally the best examples used for this argument is that there is an entire chapter dedicated to learning about the balance in the Force, and also there are a lot of lightsaber duels which, to be honest, just seem kind of odd if you're using a blaster. My first experience in the expansion was as a bounty hunter, but since I've done it with 2 Sith Warriors and most recently a Jedi Sentinel, I have to say I think this largely depends on the type of player you are. For some people, this really brings them out of their immersion, especially when, let's say, a smuggler who probably wouldn't care in the slightest or even have much knowledge about the Force is being forced to learn about it. On the other hand, I think some players simply don't mind, and it comes down to your own personal opinion, whether the expansion is better experienced as a Force user class than another, although I do think the expansion is worth experiencing either way. Another complaint brought up is that the expansion and its sequel lack much in the way of replayability. Part of the problem is that there is a single story for both factions. However, the main reason that this argument is made far more with Fallen Empire than with Shadow of Revan, which also had a single story for both factions, is that Shadow of Revan had the option to at least play it with friends, which gave you a sort of reason to replay, especially if you're playing with people who haven't done it before. However, this is something that is completely lacking from Fallen Empire. It leaves many players in a position where after doing the expansion as a light side character, and then again as a dark side character, it can get very old, and many players may decide to skip it completely. Personally, I think part of the reason why some players have their reservations about replaying Fallen Empire, rather than simply skipping it when leveling up a new character, is that the expansion, if you do all of the chapters, is very long, even if you skip all of the cutscenes. That's not even taking into account that doing Eternal Throne as well. To go along with the new story, the Old Republic also got some rather large changes to the gameplay. One of the biggest changes was that the strength, willpower, cunning and aim stats were all merged into the single stat Mastery. This was done so that players did not throw away their armour as much, because it had the wrong type of stats for their class. The Surge stat was also merged into the critical hit stat, making critical hit an even more important stat. There was also a change to how ratings were given to items. To go with these gameplay changes, there were also some rather massive changes to the leveling experience, the groundwork of which had been laid towards the end of Shadow of Revan. This was when level sync was first added to the game, where if you are too high level for a planet's content, your stats are lowered to make you the right level for that area of the planet. XP was also changed so that if you were level 40 doing level 25 content, with your stats being lowered to level 25, you got the same level of XP as you would be as a level 40 doing level 40 content. When it came to group content, XP was no longer split evenly among all members, which certainly was a welcome change, and made leveling up in groups far more efficient and practical. One of the biggest changes to the way players leveled was that the time it took to level a character was greatly reduced, with XP being far easier to get in far larger quantities. To complement this was the introduction of the critical path, which consisted of your class story, as well as planet story arcs, and missions which were considered important to the story of the Old Republic from levels 1 to 60. Heroic missions were also reworked so that you could quickly travel to the mission's location from anywhere in the galaxy, and removing the need, in most cases, to hand in the mission to an NPC or Dropbox. Missions which were deemed not important enough to be part of the critical path, so in other words, pretty much every side quest, became exploration missions. This was also added with new icons: purple triangles for critical path missions, gold triangles for critical path side missions, arrow triangles for repeatable missions such as heroics, and star triangles for exploration missions. All of these changes went to make leveling far easier than it had ever been in the game's history. The companion system also got a complete overhaul. Previously, players only had their 5 class story companions, with options to get HK and Shriek, so only 7 companions in total. However, now we had literally dozens of companions available to us through the Alliance system, the Star Fortresses, and the Cartel Market. Because of this sheer amount of companions we now had, a new companion menu was created, which helped to sort between them, and instead of companions being on your ship, they were mainly on Odessen. The big problem is that most of these new companions are just sort of there, they lack much in the way of story, and most don't even make comments on missions or anything like the companions of old. This is understandable, since the effort that would have had to be put in would have been a lot, when there are so many new companions, but it's a real shame, and I personally am not the biggest fan of this aspect of the changes to the companion system, as I really do feel it makes companions far less important. Another change was that now all companions could be changed to tank, DPS, or healers between combat, rather than being limited to 1 or 2 roles. Another change to the companion system, which is one that I rather like, is that companions were no longer affected by their armor stats, but instead the level they were, meaning that finally your companions could wear any sets of armor. One of the most important things for any DLC expansion is the endgame, as without an engaging endgame, an expansion will bleed subscribers as quickly as it gains them. Except for gaining companions through the Alliance system, the 2 closest things to endgame PvE content was the Star Fortresses and the Eternal Championship. The first of these, the Star Fortresses, sees players trying to take down space stations belonging to the Eternal Empire, which are being used to keep a tight control over the galaxy. Players have 6 planets to liberate from the Star Fortresses, with the formula for each planet being land on a planet, the Resistance contact who once the Star Fortress is defeated becomes your companion, do some quick missions, attack a shield bunker, and then do either a solo or heroic 2+ de facto flashpoint, where you kill an Exarch boss at the end and take down the Star Fortress. The main reason these days to do the Star Fortresses is for the decoration rewards, the companions, and the armor you get for doing them. But even when they came out, it wasn't really too much of a reason to do them on more than one character. The Eternal Championship added a PvE arena mode, which was soloable where players fight 10 rounds of bosses which got increasingly harder with each progressive round. This acted as a daily and weekly mission area of sorts, while also helping to get new players used to some operation and flashpoint type mechanics. For defeating the bosses you got arena tokens, which could be traded in for armor, and hollow projection decorations of the different bosses. Meanwhile we are talking about the Star Fortresses in the Eternal Championship, I feel it's important to mention that these two things were the closest to actual flashpoints we got in the Fallen Empire, and that we did not even get any sort of operations, although some flashpoints and operations were reworked for the new level cap of 65, while more flashpoints came under solo mode. Crafting also received a lot of changes to it. One of the big changes was that crafting had been split into 8 different grades, which were unlocked as you progressed in level and crafting skill. There was no longer any green premium items to craft, with the starting colour being blue as prototype. Reverse engineering was changed to, instead of giving you a random item, giving you a better version of said item. Now craftable armour was adaptive armour, components were added as a requirement for almost all schematics, most crafting times were reduced, and a bunch of other optimizations and balances to the crafting system were added. And what about the PvP content? Well, for once, there is actually something to talk about. The majority of the PvP content came with patch 4.3, Visions in the Dark. With this update, Warzone Ranked Season 7 started, as well as a new Warzone, the Odessa Proving Grounds, and the new Warzone Arena Rishi Cove Arena being added. PvP was also encouraged through the Alliance system, with a class story companion from both the Republic and the Empire being available through PvP missions, although if you were from that character's class story, you could just pick them straight up. This update also brought with it the Focus option, allowing players to pick whether they want to take part in PvP instances or PvE instances on planet, meaning PvP and PvE servers were essentially mixed into one, although, to be honest, World PvP was essentially dead at this point, so I guess it was a tad bit too little too late. Guilds also got a lot of love in Fallen Empire, with update 4.3 bringing a bunch of reworks to guilds. The largest of these was that the guild limit was doubled from 500 members to 1,000 members, literally allowing guilds to have more members than ever before. The starting hut count for the Republic and Empire flagships was also increased by 50% to 300 decorations. Finally, guilds could group players by their legacies when looking at the roster. To be honest, it is somewhat ironic that the expansion, which barely included any group content, went to encourage guilds so much. There was also a number of new features and reworked features, which I don't really have anywhere else to put in the video, so I guess I will add them here. For players who completed all 8 class stories, the legacy symbol was added. Stronghold limit was upped to 5. Opening cartel packs now had a dramatic opening sequence. When using certain abilities, a temporary toolbar would pop up, as with the legacy power. With the introduction of random mount and pet, the ability to favourite mount and pets was added, the light versus dark event system was added, but most importantly of all, capes now worked properly in most cases, instead of just sticking through chairs and mounts. As stated at the beginning, Fallen Empire is certainly a controversial expansion, but little did we know that soon an even more controversial expansion would be released. But, well, that's a video for another day, which will probably come out next Monday or Tuesday, so subscribe as to not miss it.